You Too, a great song from the Joshua Tree album. It's often overlooked because there's so many other great songs on that album. We're talking with Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda about their new book, Gods, Man, and War, part of the Secret Machines franchise. And the question I get asked about Tom the most often is probably, is it for real? Does he really have these insiders, military and intel folks who are sharing breadcrumbs, at least, of information about the UFO situation with him? And a couple of those names, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, were made public last year, were leaked out. But there's another one that's come forward. He's a 25-year CIA operative who has written the foreword to a new paperback version of the first Secret Machines book. His name is Jim Semivan, and we posted that introduction, that section of the book, on the Coast website if you want to read it and check it out and see what he says about UFOs. We'll be back in a moment, pick up our conversation about Gods, Man, and War. We asked Peter Levenda to stick around for a while, and he's agreed to do that. I think we're all better for it. We'll pick up the conversation with him in a moment. Tom, I mentioned during that last break about the guy who wrote the foreword to the paperback version. People often ask me, do you really have these people who are advising you? Why did this guy decide to let you use his name?
I don't want to speak for him. I think that what I do want to say is people really just need to listen to what I do say and know that I'm not only am I telling the truth, but they need to pay close attention to what's happening. There's some really big stuff coming up, and I think that Jim will have more of an opportunity to speak for himself rather than having me do it for him. But like I said, there's, this stuff is not only real, but the information that is within Secret Machines and how we're going about it and how we're talking about it and rolling it out, it's a very important thing, and people just need to pay attention to it.
When you say an announcement is coming or news is coming, are you talking about something from your side or something, from the other side? Something from a business announcement kind of a thing?
It's I'd rather not get into it. Okay. To be honest, right now. Yeah.
Jacques Vallée, we've mentioned him a couple of times, and he writes the foreword to this book. His central thesis has always been that there's some sort of a control system. It's not as simple as aliens from other planets visiting. They've been too much here too often, for too long, involved directly with inhuman affairs for so long that it appears to be some sort of a control system, although he never really fully explains that. Peter, it's sort of a central thesis of what you guys are dealing with, the idea that maybe religions were created as a control system to herd humans into doing what they, whoever they are, want.
Well, sure. I mean, I'm not that different from Vallée's perspective on this. I think that they do function, or the phenomenon functions as a control system. I think that's kind of inherent in the very nature of the thing. If somebody shows up with unbelievable powers and abilities, or at least abilities that we don't have, and they just suddenly show up one day in your living room, they're a control system. They're controlling your consciousness. They're going to be controlling the way you react. You may react hostily towards them. You may react violently towards them, but that's still a result of their being there and their being an actual threat and causing you to do these things, causing you to become violent. So there is a control aspect in this, and of course religion is, organized religion is all about control. I mean, they need the control. They don't function without it. And that's what I say about the problem between religion and mysticism, or the old-fashioned concept of shamanism, the original concept. These are individuals who are outside the system, who are looking to break that grip of control. So you have people who understand the value of spirituality on both sides, religion and mysticism. And I write a lot about both. I've been writing a lot about both for years. And the idea of control is inherent in religion. The religions are pitting us against each other, but the mystics understand each other, no matter what religion they belong to. And I've seen that happen again and again and again. So, if we're looking for a spiritual component, it's there. And if this phenomenon has definitely what we would consider a spiritual component, or let's say a consciousness component, and because we are so out of control ourselves, for the most part, it's going to look very much like a control mechanism. It's making us do things, or it's creating situations in which we're going to behave in a predictable way. And I think it's important for us to know ourselves a lot better before we can understand what this phenomenon is.
Tom, did you want to jump into that?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in that people might have remembered from the first time you and I did an interview on the Secret Machines project, I brought up the idea of the way humans organize around a priestly class. Now, you'll hear Peter and I talking quite a lot about religion and cargo cults and seeing things in the sky and running off and starting religions and cults and all those things. And Jacques Vallée was very much into studying, a lot of the aspects of what people do after they see these things. But it was a very, very clearly taught to me that humans are possibly designed to organize around a priestly class, and that was used over and over again, and I think that's been, obviously if we were designed to do that, that was on purpose, because exactly what Peter said, it pits us against each other, and we have a tendency to organize under whether it's a Jesus or it's an Allah or it's even a Hitler. We tend to fall in line really quickly, and I happen to believe that's by design, because if we're fighting each other, we're not looking up. And that's a very important point that's been told to me many, many times. So people need to remember that verbiage, priestly class.
There's a really excellent book called Gods of Eden that came out years ago. The guy wrote one book and then he was done. I think his name is Bramley. It develops the theory that this guy was going to write a history book, and he ended up writing about aliens, or at least some kind of alien control system, alien intervention by some unknown intelligence that manipulates human affairs throughout history. Wars seem to be the ultimate goal, that somehow there is a harvest of some sort. Now, I don't know, Peter, are you ready to jump into that in this book? You're talking about writing 3 books for this theme, but do you want to get into that general subject?
Well, I can. It's a little bit premature because that's going to come out in book 3. The 3 books are called Gods is the first volume, Man is the second, and War is the third. And so we're going to be developing that theme, but we can only really discuss the war aspect once we've laid the foundation in the first 2 novels, the first 2 nonfiction books. Andrew's going to do the novels probably and expand it as a narrative. But what we're talking about is understanding what this kind of conflict really is. We think we understand it. We've been through wars. I know in my lifetime there's been numerous wars. I lost count of them. But I think that we don't understand the true nature of conflict and what it really represents and who benefits from all of that conflict. And there's been all sorts of political economic theories that have been developed over the years, and rightly so. But I think there's another aspect of this, and we're going to develop this in much more detail in book 3 when we talk about, once we've laid the groundwork on the religion side in Gods. In Man, it's going to be laying the groundwork in science, consciousness, and all of that. Once we have all that under our belt, then we're going to approach the war, the conflict aspect, which is the most important, the most immediately relevant, perhaps, theme of this entire project, from my perspective anyway.
Well, I'll ask something that is covered in this book, and that's about humans being bred as slaves. Now, that theme has appeared in other books. Other scholars have raised it. It appears in some religious literature. But you guys sort of pull this together and make a fairly compelling case that maybe we were bred by somebody to do slave labor. The religious stuff comes later.
The earliest myth, if you want to call it myth, of which we have any record, is the creation epic that was found in the Sumerian cuneiform texts. And in this myth, this idea about the creation of the world, humans specifically are created as slaves because the gods are lazy. And the implication is we were created from divine essence, yes, to a certain extent, the breath of one of the gods and the blood of a slain god or goddess was used to formulate these clay figures that were humans. The breath of the victorious god was breathed into these clay figures. They became animated, and basically we're descendants of that race. We're a slave race. Some of the things that Zecharia Sitchin was trying to talk about, and he did talk about in his books in various ways, if we just look at the prime example, that very first creation epic, we're going to find in that Sumerian text a very clear idea that we were created as slaves, that the gods had conflict between them, as we talked about earlier. They were fighting each other, one side won over the other, and we're the result of that conflict. Sort of the way that Genesis 6 talks about it as well. The kind of a conflict between the sons of God, the daughters of men, an ancient race that was bred, a kind of troglodyte race or some sort of genetic abnormality, which was then destroyed eventually as well. So this is there. This idea is there, and I think it refers to something that actually took place, and it was the Sumerians trying to describe what had happened and what their role was as human beings. They saw themselves building these fantastic civilizations that hadn't been built before, and yet in the back of their mind, they are a slave race, and that's fascinating to me.
Tom, is it your guess, or maybe more than a guess, that would be a reason for a cover-up and ongoing withholding of information from the public by the folks who are the keepers of the secrets? The idea that, look, people are going to have trouble accepting this notion that we were created as a slave race, that some other intelligence has intervened in human affairs throughout our history, manipulated us in ways that have led to horrible slaughter. Is that a reason?
There's two parts of that. Slave race is the first part, in my view, is specifically to keep us, at each other's throats and keep us completely occupied and entertained. And that's kind of the slave portion, in sense where we are doing things because of a grand design that we don't even know that we've been duped. And the second part of that is, well, what's it for? What's the reason for? And that's something that I plan on getting into a little bit later, but I don't feel comfortable getting into that now because it's not all good. I think people have to question to themselves this idea of sovereignty, and are people really ready to understand and to admit to themselves that we are not completely in control like we think we are. And once you come to terms with that, it's a really different worldview you're going to have. And I think when you look at why the powers that be did what they did, is because that's a really, really big deal when you find out, oh my God, what's been going on here for a few thousand years? Holy cow, someone owns us. Actually, maybe there's more than one, and they don't like each other very much, and there's we're the victims of a proxy war, and it's a big deal. This is a big thing, So we're that's why we're spending a few years rolling this out and trying to get people to understand the enormity of it.
Charles Fort, the famous line that he had, "We are property." Peter, that's sort of where you're going.
Well, yeah, to an extent, but as I say, we have to really define the terms. As Tom is pointing out, it's not as cut and dried as it would appear, as Bramley did an excellent job too. William Bramley, I think, in Gods of Eden, he was explaining that, and Charles Fort came to that same conclusion based on his own experiences and the information he was collecting. People come to that understanding. But there may be more to it than that. It may be more complicated than that. But even in monotheistic religions, there's this idea that we are slaves of a God who is all powerful, all seeing, and if we step out of line, we're going to get smited or something. So there's this idea that we are at the mercy of supernatural forces. And by supernatural, I don't necessarily mean the way we understand that term normally, but let's say superhuman forces, things that are not quite human, the sons of God idea. There are forces that, are controlling, attempting to control, attempting to steer, this planet in one direction or another. And part of what we're trying to do as humans in general is to break free of that relationship. The idea that we may be dealing with forces that are hostile to us, that may be simplistic as well. If what is the relationship of ants to a human foot walking on an anthill? The ants may perceive that foot as being hostile and evil and aggressive and all the rest of it, but the person wearing that shoe walking is totally oblivious to the existence of the ants. It may be something as simple as that, but on a different scale. So part of our project here with Secret Machines is to penetrate deeper into the secrets of this and to understand and to reveal more of the true nature of this relationship and of this conflict that exists, which then we explore more fully in the volume called War.
I mean, you do explore in this volume the idea that there was interbreeding, that we are a hybrid race. Yes. So is there genetic evidence, something in the DNA that stands out that suggests that something other than us is involved? You do cover that.
I cover it, and I cover it much more extensively in Volume 2, the volume called Man, where I talk about the genetic component in greater detail. We believe, or I believe, let's say, I will speak for myself, and Tom can add or subtract from what I'm saying, just as the basis of what I've come to understand so far, is that Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize winner who discovered, or was one of the discoverers of the DNA helix, was a devotee of a theory that said the genetic material on this planet was seeded here. Crick did not believe it arose spontaneously on the planet Earth, that the genetic code came from somewhere else. He formed a theory called directed panspermia. And the idea was that whatever these components were of the RNA, probably originally, was just seeded onto the planet, and like the planet was basically a field or a pasture, and you were seeding, flowers. And all life was basically designed somewhere else and brought to this planet. Well, I explored that idea plus another idea which is even more astounding, and that is the research of a couple of Russian scientists out in Kazakhstan who believe that the genetic code itself was artificially created because it has start and stop codes built into it, and there's really nothing else in nature that does. So they believe from a mathematical basis, ignoring Crick and directed panspermia, they believe strictly from a mathematical basis that the genetic code was artificially created, was not a spontaneous, creation. I mean, one researcher made the analogy that expecting the DNA to grow, spontaneously from this planet, from a collection of materials, is like putting a bunch of rocks in a box and shaking it and expecting a Cadillac is going to drive out. That the complexity is that great. So there is a possibility, and who am I to argue with Francis Crick and put forward an alternate theory at this point? Crick did seem to believe that the genetic code itself is alien, which means that we basically are the aliens.
Well, that's a heck of a lot to get your head around. One of the other topics that you tackle in this is the tendency of humans to push back. The idea of building a stairway to heaven, pyramids and things of that sort, that we want to become gods, and we end up paying a price when that happens. We're going to take a break now in a moment, and then we'll come back and get into that. The idea that humans have tried to become gods themselves and the consequences of that. Talking with Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda about Gods, Man, and War, Secret Machines, Volume 1. We'll be right back. Creedence Clearwater took us into the break. Foo Fighters, Outside, bring us back into the program. There's a line in that song that says there's something out there, and I think they're right. There is something out there. We've been hearing about it with my guests, Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda, and their new book, Secret Machines, Gods, Man, and War, Volume 1. A programming note from our colleague, George Norrie. He's got an event coming up May 6th at Cal State Northridge. The time has changed. The event is 7 to 10 p.m., previously announced as 5 to 8. It's not that. It's 7 to 10. He's got Daniel Brinkley and Whitley Strieber and other guests. That sounds pretty good. I might have to fly down for that myself. Tom DeLonge had said earlier in this program there is some sort of a program that's been underway for some time, and an announcement may be coming soon. We're going to prod a little bit on that when we come back and see what we can find out. Stick around. Tom, you had mentioned early in the program that you think a program has been underway for a while to sort of get us ready for what might be coming. When you see a story, the kind of thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the program, the story about these 7 planets 39 light years away, an announcement like that, do you look at it in a different light? That you think maybe it's part of something like that? And when you see a movie like Arrival, do you think that's also part of an ongoing program or just a coincidence?
I think Arrival is a coincidence. I don't think that's part of it. I think by the time we turn Secret Machines into a major motion picture, and you watch that next to something like Arrival, there's going to be some very big differences. I really liked how they portrayed it in the sense of where it got people thinking and they took it seriously. And some of the things in there were very interesting for sure. But with Secret Machines, we're not going to be taking the latitude of creating our own types of aliens and making everything so nice and easily digestible. I think it's going to be, our goal is to keep it directly to how it really is going on. But in the sense of an ongoing program, I had someone very important once say to me, it really makes you wonder if there's an outreach program, and the person just stared at me, and those words really ring true in many ways now that I look back and I understand it. So when I think about the release of the 7 planets and all that, yeah, it really does seem like things are ramping up pretty fast. And as I said, there's a lot of corporations and a lot of very wealthy people starting to send satellites out towards the moon and Mars and all this stuff. So if they don't start this conversation soon, they're going to be caught off guard by what other people find, and that's going to really create some issues.
Have you had any pushback as you try to converse with these advisors, and presumably someone somewhere above them knows what's going on, and they have to have some kind of an okay or green light or semi-green light? Has there been any pushback? We've had a couple of programs where we've talked about a group called the Collins Elite, and I have some firsthand knowledge about pushback from those folks who are very religious and see anything of the paranormal or supernatural nature as demonic and evil, and it needs to be stopped.
I haven't had any pushback from that group. I have heard of that group, and I as well know that there is some reality to that. I've been more concerned about pushback from the phenomenon itself. It has a tendency to stay in charge. I think I had one person tell me evidence extinct ancient civilizations are possibly evidence of those who did not obey, and that's a scary thought. But looking at what the Collins Elite say, and I think Peter's going to have a lot to say to this. One of the reasons I really wanted to work with Peter was because of his work and his scholarly work with the occult and with ancient religious tradition and texts. But there's a lot to this idea that with demonic forces you have to invite it in. Well, guess what? People that are seeing a lot of UFOs are thinking it's some type of spiritual event, and they're meditating to bring it in, and they're asking for it to show up, and they're thanking it when it does, and it has a lot of similarities there. But one thing's for sure, the amount of cults that have been started and the amount of religious experience that has been around people that are witnesses, it's just uncanny. I mean, even with the Nazis. And Peter, I think you should jump in and tell people about the through line that from what the Nazis were doing with their rituals and seances and UFOs all the way up till now.
Well, yeah. Basically, yeah. In fact, I bring this up briefly in Gods, right in the very beginning, because I, of course, talk about Walter Dornberger, a very famous general in charge of the V-2 rocket stuff going on at Peenemünde during the war.
The paperclip scientist, yeah.
Scientist, yeah, who winds up at Wright Field in July of 1947 when they're bringing the Roswell debris there. And then I jump to William Dudley Pelley, who was a Nazi sympathizer in the United States. He ran an organization called the Silver Legion, sometimes called the Silver Shirts. This was a rabidly pro-Nazi organization, But Peli believed he was in contact with the space beings, and he had a whole UFO philosophy built into the Nazi ideology. It was all brought together. So you have this sort of Nazi UFO thing that goes on, and of course I mentioned the very famous case of the Nine that I'm always talking about. All of these things are brought up in the prologue itself of Gods to show that there is this problem that we have because we don't understand this phenomenon very well. Some of us tend to worship it in a sense, and there were cults around William Peli, for instance, the silver shirt leader, that were UFO cults, and end of the world cults, and all of these people ended, disastrously. All of his followers were, cheated and robbed and, made fools of and everything else because of this belief that the space brothers were our friends, So we have to be careful because we don't know what these forces are. We don't have any basis, any context for believing that they're all beneficial and they're going to love us and bring peace to the planet. We don't know that. We have no way of knowing that, So the reluctance of not only our scientists and engineers, but military people and intelligence people, their reluctance to engage with this force in any meaningful way is, I think, related to that. We just don't know what it is. And is this going to be a major security issue for us if we all start trying to, make contact with the phenomenon? So how do we go about handling that situation if it happens?
I remember hearing about the Collins Elite the first time, and my reaction was, "Oh, come on, demons? Really? There are people in the CIA and the Department of Defense and NSA who are worried about demons?" And then, after you think about it a while, well, what's the difference? Who knows? Who knows the ultimate story of where they're from or why they're here? We don't really know.
That's exactly the point. I think that, one man's demon is another man's alien, and it's all the same stuff. I remember I had a really interesting exchange with somebody, and I said, well, would this particular group be the angels of the Bible? And I got one word back, yes. And I said, so the other group would be the demons. Correct. And I said, well, I would imagine they don't like each other very much. Agreed. So it's exactly as Peter says. People are seeing things and creating religions, and so it's like it's hard to go, oh, it's demonic. Oh my God, no, it's just it's one religion talking about this phenomenon, and they labeled it a demon and an angel. But if you go to another religion, they called it something different. But it's all the same thing.
Are they the bad guys because we chose one side? You said earlier tonight we chose sides. Are they demons in our eyes because we chose the other side?
I wouldn't say demons necessarily. I mean, I was told specifically, empire building and resource extraction, but I mean, amongst other things, I'm sure there's a lot going on. I think, that in my view, it gets tricky for me to say something. We should just move on that.
Let me ask you this, big picture stuff. The big picture questions about UFOs that have haunted all of us who have pursued this topic. Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? Can you address any of those? I mean, are they aliens? I mean, you said earlier they could be from other planets or other dimensions. Is it more likely that they've always been here?
It's more likely they've always been here, an outpost of a small group that came and studied for quite a while, and then created a way to interface with us. But it's not just one group. There's one that traces its roots back to antiquity, long before the ancient Greeks, and going back to the timelines of Atlantis and beyond. And then there's other groups that are outside of the solar system that just are just bad news. So you have different groups, some that have been here forever, probably, maybe long before we were here, and others that have come from somewhere else, but they could have been here for millions or hundreds or thousands of years as well. So I don't have that kind of detailed information, but I can say an outpost that's been here for quite some time that pops up from time to time, and then another group from outside the solar system. I can say that.
I mean, Peter makes the case about there's been manipulation throughout human history, what looks like them, forcing us to fight other groups, getting into wars, carnage results. I just wonder if that is still the situation, or whether Tom or Peter, that whether we have back-channel communications with potential adversaries. Do we talk to the Chinese and Russians? Okay, you guys, we know you've got some technology too. Let's talk about this before anything bad happens.
The answer is yes. And once again, if you heard something I said earlier tonight, is what kept the Cold War from getting hot. So it was a very important collaboration that went on, and I think this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to tell the story, because I thought it was incredible. You have the whole world trying to devour itself after World War II into the Cold War, and nuclear weapons were just a button away from annihilating all life on Earth. But really, all these adversaries were working together and passing around weaponry and working on weaponry together to figure out how to handle this problem. And I go, well, that's a stand-up thing. They took the ego out of the equation, and they were working together. They weren't so worried about boundaries of countries and economic warfare and what treaty is being broken. They were just going, let's build this together. Let's figure this out together. What we have, we'll give to you. What you have, you'll give to us. We need to make sure that we're all, on the same team. And I just go, man, the human race needs a little bit more of that. They need to hear about that. They need to be inspired. So I find that as one of the great things that came out of all this.
Seems like fighting back is a risky proposition. One of the themes that you write about, Peter, is sort of the stairway to heaven concept. That we not only try to mock what we have seen from these gods, but we try to become them. And there's pretty dire consequences as a result. I just wonder if the same thing could happen now.
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're driven. If we go back to that earlier discussion we had about Francis Crick and DNA and the fact that it might have been seeded here from someplace else, we may have it hardwired into our consciousness, into our bodies even, this desire to really realize who we are. If our genetic material was seeded here, if it came from somewhere else, then we're kind of programmed to go back to where that came from. We're kind of programmed to reach for that point of origin, to understand who we are, to fully realize that. And I think that, ancient Egypt was one, very clear example to me of people who were really focused on that end, to the extent they're building pyramids and they're aligning them properly, and the elaborate mummification rituals, all involving the stars, particularly the North Star and the circumpolar stars going straight out into space. So there's this idea that, we need to do this. And at the same time, I think there are powers, forces, the control mechanism that Jacques Vallée talks about that's trying to keep us from doing that. So there's this tension, and again, we'll get into that more in Volume 3 in War, but there's this tension between who we are, what our true nature is, and the goals that we're trying to achieve on one side. And on the other side, the tension is those who are trying to keep us back where we belong as the slave race, let's call it, as to keep us on the planet, to keep us docile, to keep us fighting each other so we don't realize our potential as human beings, as people who are genetically programmed really to be as gods, as the serpent said to Eve in the garden.
Would they stop a nuclear war, do you think? I mean, obviously, we've got something they need. They harvest it here and there. If your thesis is correct, they, stimulate war and get something out of it, souls or bodies or meat, something. If we were somehow to launch a nuclear war, would they stop it? Would that eliminate the harvest and thus they'd intervene? What do you think, Tom?
Well, according to what we've heard, according to what I've read even, and Tom can amplify this or not, but they already have. It already has been. You've heard about some of the missile silos, the almost launches that have taken place with heavy UFO activity, not just in the United States, but in the Soviet Union as well, back during the Cold War. So there were UFO phenomenon presences around where things looked like they were going to lift off at any moment.
Yeah, well, that's them sort of initiating it, messing with us, and maybe trying to initiate a false launch. That's my understanding of those cases. But
but a false launch didn't take place, and
right.
Why didn't it when they were totally in control of the electronics?
That's one of the things that gets really confusing, because you guys are both right. It's like they instigated the launch, but then it didn't really take place. So are they trying to scare us, or are they trying to get the other one of us to act and do it ourselves? But we do know that they're coming and scanning our missile silos. We do know that they're turning the weapons on and changing the guidance system and all of that. I personally am under the belief, and Peter and I actually talked about this great length last night, that and this is something I'm gonna try and rely on Peter's scholarly work, but I believe that the nuclear weaponry that we gave to Russia on purpose. We handed it to them because we knew that there was a much greater threat. So we made 20,000 nuclear weapons and spread them out all over the earth, so there's no way they can all be taken out at once. And I'm under the impression that's probably a lot closer to the truth than some of the other theories that are floating around out there.
Wow, well, that's something to chew on. Over the years, you read these UFO books. We're going to go to a break here in a second, but that include encounters that people have had. They come back and report sort of an alien editorial, if you want to call it that, where these beings lecture them about, we're worried about nukes, we're worried about you destroying the planet, be good to each other, save the environment kind of stuff. They tell us how to live, but there's not a whole lot of evidence of them directly intervening. It seems like they would have the ability to fix a lot of stuff if they wanted to. When we come back, maybe we can get into that a little bit. And then, Peter, if you'll stick around for half an hour, we'll open up the phone lines. I know people will have questions for you, and then we'll have questions for Tom in the last half hour, just him. And hope folks are enjoying this. We're talking with Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda about Gods, Man, and War. Much more to come in our final hour of Coast to Coast AM.